So my name is John Willis. I am a director of Multicloud Management Services at Dell. So actually, my company was acquired 4 months ago. So I basically went from a 35-person company to a 120,000-person company. As a little bit of a background, I pretty much, my whole career has been with companies less than 50 for at least 30 years. So it's kind of interesting. Part of this presentation is, I'm actually going to kind of do a product presentation, but it won't be. How many people have seen me give presentations before here? A few? Couple, yeah. So, I like to throw in a lot of philosophy of things. And so at the end, I'm going to do a product demo, but it's cool because I'll show you how we integrate Puppet and Puppet 3.0 and all that good stuff and how you can provision, and it should fit the story. But last night at speakers dinner, a couple of guys we were talking to, I told them I'm doing a product, because I always do things like culture, DevOps. I do presentations about Deming and why he relates to DevOps and real crazy stuff. And somebody asked me, when's the last time you did a product presentation? I said, I think when I was 9 years old. So anyway, infrastructure cloud management. The other thing too is somebody asked me, like, why didn't you call it cloud infrastructure management? And because it's not really about cloud. Cloud is a component of it, right? I think sometimes we make the mistake of thinking, cloud first. It's a cloudy world. So the grown-up way of saying cloudy world or cloudy this is a fancier way of saying infrastructure cloud management. So what I'm going to talk about, I'm going to go through this introduction stuff, who I am, a little bit about the terminology I'm going to use, a little bit of trends. I work for Dell now, so I've got to do trends, right? So the obligatory cloud is going to do this, cloud is going to do that stuff. I'm not going to do a what is a cloud, so if you want that, out of here now. And then I'm going to talk about infrastructure cloud management, what I think it means. And I'll talk about my background a little bit. I've spent a lot of time in web scale, but I've spent a lot of time in large scale infrastructure companies. In fact, I started my career at Exxon. I was a business partner for IBM for many years doing Tivoli stuff. So I've been in large infrastructure my whole career. And then I wound up getting into kind of a DevOps space. So a lot of my observations are from the two vantage points of, what is web scale doing? I mean, I remember when Luke was a one-man company and I got drunk with him and I talked him into selling me his really cool hat and gave it back to him the next day. And so I've been doing even, this side of it for quite a while. And then I'm going to give you a demonstration, and hopefully the demonstration gods will be nice to me. And the other thing is I am a manager. So anytime I look stupid, I can say I am a manager. And I pull my manager card out. So I am Botchigaloop on Twitter. That's the best place to find me. It's horrible to spell, but that's who I am. I'm one of the core founders of DevOps Days. So I was at the original DevOps Days in Ghent in 2009. I actually was responsible for bringing the first DevOps conference over to the US, that piggyback velocity. And I have the privilege of working with Gene Kim on what we call the IT revolution. We're working on, how many people know Gene Kim, right? Everybody knows Gene Kim, right? He's got a phenomenal book, The Phoenix Project. Well, I'm working on a companion book called the DevOps Cookbook, and it's IT revolution is what we call it. I've been 35 years in IT, so I've been kind of an IT ops guy my whole life. I've done lots of startups. I've been two large companies, Exxon, I'm beginning my career, and now I'm at Dell. And I'm not going to tell you a startup story, which I love to tell startup stories, but I've had miserable failures like my whole career, and that's like the fun part of being in the startup is failing, learning. So I also do a DevOps Cafe podcast with my good friend Damon Edwards. We interview a lot of different people. A lot of people speak at this conference: Luke, Adam Jacob, Patrick DeBar, Gene Kim, Jez Humble. The list goes on. John Allspar. They've all been on the show. We have a lot of fun there. So cloud adoption, right? So what do we hear? So what I'm going to try to tell you is about 18 months, actually plus 4, so 22 months ago, almost 2 years ago, I went to work for Enstratius. Let me tell you two other things I think are important in this picture. Most notable companies I worked for, I was the 9th person in at Opscode. So I went through that whole Opscode from basically early beta to really driving kind of mass adoption of that tool. And I also worked at Canonical as the original with Simon Wardley's cloud evangelism. And I'm not bragging, I'm trying to give you a sense that I have some perspective on on what cloud looks like. So when I tell you all these stories, whether they're right or wrong, it doesn't matter. It's my perspective. So the things that we hear, a lot of this is kind of Dellized version, but I don't disagree. We try to get public cloud so we can get closer to our customer front end. I use Amazon Joint because I don't want to put all my eggs in one basket. Our test system, we're trying to build an on-prem infrastructure. I mean, the real story is, the key takeaway is incredible fragmentation in the infrastructure, right? And what one customer calls a cloud, another person screams and hollers and says that's not a cloud, and right? So even like the definition of what a cloud, and for me, who cares? It's what the customer thinks it is, right? But the modern data center is really completely fragmented. Some other data points I thought that might be interesting while I was researching this. And IBM thinks it is 2.5 quadrillion bytes of data created every day, and 90% has been created in the last 2 years, right? So the good news is everybody in this room is going to have a job for the next 25 years, right? The infrastructure is growing like weeds. The more mobile, the more pervasive devices, wearable devices, all are going to need back-end infrastructure, right? So none of this is going to get easier, and it's going to keep growing. Some other data points, I'm done with the data points. Some things Gartner has said. I mean, it's growth, right? It's incredible growth, whether it's internal infrastructure or public infrastructure, but it's certainly both, right? But here's the thing, this is what I see a lot, and probably for any of you guys who follow cloud or have been dealing with the cloud, right? There's two, it almost is the DevOps story, right? It's organizations trying to be agile, trying to get things done, business units. In the web scale, right, it's all about that, right? In the web scale, you don't really have an option. When you're a startup or web scale, you basically, you take shortcuts, you build infrastructure. There was a great presentation earlier today about one of the companies, how they use everything on Amazon, right? And that's an awesome way to go if you're a startup, right? But even in the large corporations, you have the business units, and we'll talk about, not all applications are equal in a company, but they're basically having to do things fast. The ability for digital properties, marketing, those types of things are demanding business units to move really fast. They're going to infrastructure as a service. They're going to SaaS-based, mostly public. We tend to call those things like shadow IT. I don't like the term rogue IT, but sometimes called rogue IT. And they're not really concerned about securities, SLA, ongoing support, cost of IT. They're not really doing the math. They're just getting out there and getting things done. And again, for certain business units, that is the optimum model. But the question is, for the overall business goal of an organization, it may or may not be the right model, right? Being agile is not always the best thing. And again, I'm a big fan of agile. I'm a DevOps guy. I like agility. I like things moving fast. That's the world I live in. But unfortunately, a company that's $1 billion, $40 billion, or $60 billion in revenue, right? Those aren't always options, right? And so they have the moat, the glass house. And there's a reason why there's a reason why people still use the term ITIL, right? Because there is some meat to things that have to be controlled. And I'm going to go through some of the reasons, right? So the IT operations is having this conflict with, A, how do we keep up with these guys? How do we provide the type of resources that they need, but maintain the fort, but more importantly, maintain the things that get us in big trouble. I remember early on in my cloud conversations, all of us, I'm an evangelist, right? So when I'm selling Chef, I'm telling everybody Chef is the greatest thing ever. When I'm selling cloud is, oh, you're an idiot for not using cloud. So early on, I was talking to a couple of my old Tivoli customers, big banks and stuff, and I was explaining like cloud, and they're like, not going to happen here. I'm like, oh, you don't get it. This is going to be so awesome. And he said, all right, John, I got one question for you. Can you basically guarantee my CEO that he won't go to jail? Nope, not making that SLA, right? Because when it comes down to it, those are some of the things that you do have to worry about. I mean, for the wrong decisions in cloud, somebody can go to jail. Or other things like lose your brand recognition, get sued for an incredible amount of money. And I'm not trying to sell a be scared of cloud story. That was a story that was told like 4 years ago. I'm just saying the reality check in the enterprise is there's a middle ground here. And it's not all cloud and it's not all not cloud. Another kind of trend is, this multi-cloud. I think a lot of vendors kind of promote this idea that there's one cloud, and you basically concentrate on that one cloud, and then you build these hybrid extensions around that one cloud strategy. And almost every vendor in the space now really comes off of that. I love Openstack, but the Openstack zealots are pretty much about, like, so there we go. Openstack is the only way. We're going to build Openstack, and everything else is going to be a hybrid extension to that. Right? And, and then you got the VMware folk who have a different view of that world. Right? And the truth of the matter is, as I walk into customer after customer after customer, the bottom line is there's all variations of what a customer calls cloud. In one organization, it's vSphere. And it's, hey, how do you give me my cloud-like things with this? And oh, by the way, we still have bare metal. And I got pulled into a big discussion. It was like a cloud day at ING Bank in Europe. Chris is not in the room, right? No, Chris Byatt brought me over to ING Bank to do this whole DevOps day thing. And somebody made the mistake of saying that I actually worked on the mainframe years ago. So next thing, I'm sitting in a room with a bunch of mainframe guys screaming and hollering how the rest of the company's trying to make them do continuous delivery. But the point is, and I'm like, hey, sorry, guys, no help here. But the point is, the mainframe's still out there, right? IMS, CICS, that stuff exists. My point is, the large enterprises have all sorts of variations of what somebody might call the cloud. In fact, right now, one of the pushes is to basically make bare metal cloud-like. Right? There's certain API abstractions now where, hey, I want to compute. Here's the API called Bang. It goes out to a system. Dell has a system called Active System Management. Other people have it. I think what is it? SoftLayer. SoftLayer will do bare metal provisioning with an API call. How the hell they do that? I don't know. Right? But they do it. And then you have this multi-cloud world. Right? The real world is that in the enterprise, the elephant in the room is vSphere. Right? It's VMware. There's pockets of, high percentages of shadow IT doing Amazon in every enterprise I go to. And then there's, all variations of bare metal and all other things going on. And then you have this other complexity problem, which is we've gotten really good at composite applications. 5, 10 years ago, it was simple LAMP stacks, right? It was basically tiered structures. The database structures got a little more complicated. Now it's things like cluster software is like React, or it's peer-to-peer queuing. So what used to look really simple, kind of vertical and horizontal, are really like these circles of spreading out arms. Right? And that's what a complex application looks like. And then to throw kind of salt on the wound is people want to then take the multi-cloud strategy and the composite applications that shrink and grow and go away and put them on different infrastructures. For various reasons. That's the hybrid cloud, if you will, right? Which is more myth today, in my opinion, than reality, but this is what people want to do. They want to somehow have some in-house structure that could then have parts of it out in a public structure. And so kind of another thing that I see as I travel through and I talk to a lot of people is this classic scenario of you walk in a company, and almost every company, large cap company that I talk to is pretty much the same. You got a team A, let's just call it team A, running core services. Right? It's the bread and butter of the business. It's highly virtualized in most companies today. It's usually VMware, right? And then you got kind of a team B that's actually trying to become web scale capable. They're trying to stop the people from going out to Amazon. They're saying, hey, we can build consumable resources. If you give us some time, we'll get this together, and you can make API calls to this thing we have, just like you can make the calls out to Amazon. And then you got some Team C out there that's kind of gone on their own, right? And there's a good example, a company I worked with, Shopzilla. They're not really legacy, but they're not really kind of new scale. 10 years of being great at Oracle Coherence. 10 years to get to be experts at Coherence. Took them 6 months to convert that to Cassandra, running on Joyent. Right? Wiped out all of their uses of Oracle Coherence, right? BI stuff, right? But that was a sanctioned product. So that's a public cloud They went through a process to do it. It wasn't really rogue IT. And then you have kind of the end, which is the shadow IT, where companies are just, people are just pulling out credit cards and getting Amazon accounts. I went into a company the other day, 160 different Amazon accounts, right? And so I was talking to the CIO, and I do this little game. Normally it's like 30, 40, or 50. And I play this little game where I say, well, how many people do you think have access to all those accounts? Like a little kid, and they'll be like, a lot? And I'm like, yeah, like thousands. And then I ask the second question, so I'm just having fun, right? I'm like, and obviously I'm trying to convince them that, you should probably use my product. But then the second question is, where do you think all those credentials are? Well, let me tell you. They're in spreadsheets. They're in wikis. In fact, there's a bunch of consultants that used to work here last year that are building their new startup on your account. Right? Don't kid yourself. I mean, I know a guy that worked at Zynga. I forget what the number was. At one point, it was $65 million a year was their Amazon bill. I think that was published, right? And this guy who worked there did a lot of the infrastructure stuff. He said there was so many, it was so brittle, honestly. Nothing against them. It's just kind of going cloud too fast, cloud too early, and growing too fast, right? A bad combo. But you say that his estimation that had to be somewhere like 5 or 10 million of that was just instances that never got shut down because they weren't managed. Nobody knew who they were, whether they should be shut down, they could be shut down, or they would do things like they'd spray out an application. If it didn't work, they'd spray it again, and they'd spray it again. Oh, the third one worked, right? There's a lot of, in the public cloud, if not unmanaged, there's a lot of activity out there that goes uncontrolled. But here's the thing, right? So in this scenario, you've got a security team that is completely aware of this, has had their fingers in this, controlling this. They have no clue what's going on in Team B. Nobody even told them, didn't get the email. They've been pretty much involved in the Team C project, right? They've been playing around there, and they don't have any idea. I know that Amazon's being used, and it's driving them nuts. And then, sorry for the misspelling, but risk management, they've had their hooks in this big time. They actually have been working with Team C too. Again, don't know anything about Team B, Team D. IT operations actually knows about these two, but has no idea what's going on with Team C because they didn't get the memo, and it's driving them nuts about Team D. And what do you think the CIO is doing in this scenario? Right? Knows that it's just insanity. Right? And that's the state of the union in a large enterprise right now. Again, if you've seen one that's different, other than, all right, there's some, Netflix, something. All right, Netflix, no. Well, but large enterprise, large banks, this is the common pattern that you're going to see. So what do I mean by infrastructure cloud management? Throw out some more buzzwords, right? So converged infrastructure, right? So this idea that we get some form of compute, network, and storage. Ultimately, I want it as an API call. Right, but there's all sorts of flavors of it. And then we've had this idea of self-service. Amazon gave us some really nice ways to do and deliver self-service. And the large enterprises have been trying to backfill that capability. Openstack, CloudStack, Eucalyptus are all examples of trying to do what Amazon has done very well. And I say that this thing that you have to be really good at in the large enterprise is that kind of intersection between those two. Be able to deliver converged infrastructure to the programmers, to the software developers, to the people who actually just need resources in simple consumable form. Compute, storage, and network. Right? And allow me to control my own destiny and tie that together in some way that protects the organization. That's the ultimate. Self-service isn't get people in rogue IT things faster. Self-service is about putting an infrastructure around the delivery model so that I'm doing all the things right for the company. So I'm putting things like policy. I'm building catalog management of how the application should look and deliver. I think to me right now, I do a lot of presentations about culture, and I talk a lot about GitHub, and I talk a lot about Netflix, and they're incredibly interesting DevOps culture stories. GE is an incredible enterprise culture story, but even more interesting, they're really interesting in terms of how they're attacking the internet. And if you start reading about all the things they're doing out there, one of the first things they're talking about is redefining themselves through this lens of the industrial internet, right? You'll find tons of information about how they think about DevOps. I mean, they're serious about DevOps. You'll see discussions from infrastructure as code is how we're going to transform GE. Right? Where do you hear that in a large ag? I mean, I've been seeing some interesting large companies here. Like the Bank of America using Puppet. That's awesome, right? But you typically don't hear that type of combination of something. Oh, I know what infrastructure as code is, and by the way, we're the sixth largest cap company in the world, and we think that infrastructure as code is going to transform the way we do business, right? And if you look at the GE problem, right? So if you go back to this problem of how do you get good in the middle there, so GE has 300,000 employees. They do business in 400 countries. They have regulations and compliance and all sorts of things across thousands of boundaries. They get 500,000 suppliers. They operate in kind of 6 dominant languages, right? And how do they do, a cloudy world? So to me, I'm like got my popcorn and I'm watching this, because I think that my opinion is if they succeed on the way they're doing it, unfortunately for us here at PuppetConf, they chose the other guys, but that's not the point. The real point is, I think that if you look at what GE has done over the years, I think that if you look at what they've done for things like Six Sigma, whether you like it or not, when they put the stake in the ground to transform the industry, they do serious stuff. And I think this is one where they're probably going to do pretty well, and I think a lot of large enterprises are going to look at them. So what is converged infrastructure, right? So at the hardware level, it's basically the same backplane for compute, storage, and network. You have the VCE, UCS. Dell has something called Active Systems Manager, right? It's and then the virtualization is another attempt at converged infrastructure. Incredibly interesting stuff going on in what I'll call the softwareization of the network, right? SDN, kind of a buzzword, but Open vSwitch, Open Daylight, what Nicira, NSX at VMware. Next week should be incredibly fun here. Unfortunately, I'll be back in Atlanta. And then private cloud, again, is I think the moat that enterprises are trying to build to supply a software-based version of converged infrastructure. But at the end of the day, I like to laugh when the converged infrastructure folk get up there and start pontificating that AWS is the ultimate converged infrastructure. Like, it's an API call for compute, network, and storage, and everything else is somebody else's responsibility. So that's converged infrastructure. And then you combine that with self-service. Like, what do you have to be good at? So you definitely want to be good at infrastructure in a converged manner, and then you need to be good at protecting the fort in a way. And so what does that mean? It means really understanding how to build a delivery mechanism that enforces policy. And not policy as a buzzword. Policy that gives a global catalog for delivery of templates or business patterns, services. Right? This is a service. You hit a button, that service gets deployed on 10 systems. Right? And more importantly, the location of those services wind up in the right place. And the right place for lots of different reasons. The right place is before the cost. The right place because somebody goes to jail if it winds up in the wrong place. And then also latency. Right, so having that level, and I'm not saying my company doesn't do it. I don't know any company that does this. This is the pie in the sky dream of what it needs to look like. Budget control. One of the things I love doing when I get, if I go into a large company and they'll one of the sales guys drag me and they'll say, "Oh, this company's doing cloud and they want to build a cloud and oh my God, they got to rush to the cloud and it's got to be done yesterday." So I have what I call my knucklehead cloud litmus test, right? Like, are you building a knucklehead cloud or are you building a real cloud? And so the first question I ask, if it's an enterprise, now if it's a startup, whole different question, right? If it's web scale startup, whole set of criteria. But if it's a large enterprise and I know it smells like legacy, seen that movie before, one of the first questions I ask is the risk management team involved in this project? And if I get deer in the headlights look, then I know they're clueless, right? And then the second question, just to kind of have fun, is have you done any level of data classification, right? Because then it becomes really easy to build a cloud. If risk people come in and tell you that, hey, here's the checklist. As simple as green, yellow, red, or more sophisticated as 12-step, like this is, if it's this kind of data, it can only go here. If it's this data, it can go here or here. If it's this data, it can go here, here, here. Right? And that data is things like maybe contracts with external people. Maybe you're somebody who sells sneakers and you've got contracts with guys like Michael Jordan. And where that contract lives is incredibly important. Obviously, the obvious stuff like people's credit cards and then you start talking about data transferring between regions and different countries, right? There's all sorts of implications. So one of the things that when I first got to Enstratius, I figured, okay, how am I going to be effective here? How am I going to help them tell a story about like why is this all important and what we do? And I thought about like what I learned from Chef and Puppet and automation and all the things you have to do. And I thought about what does it take to build a successful cloud in a serious business that that has international boundaries and concerns about data and things where people probably could get in real trouble if you make bad mistakes, or the company could go out of business with the wrong mistake, right? And so I thought about it's really made up of kind of three pieces of being really good. And one is kind of choice, or being really good, or having a competency at dealing with infrastructure and different kinds of infrastructure. When Amazon first came out, there was really one cloud. So you say, okay, well, I'm good at cloud. Well, I'm good at Amazon. Well, today being good at cloud means, are you good at like understanding how Openstack is different from Amazon, which is different from vCloud? Do you have a competency for delivering that in a way that the business consumes it within the right strategies of the company? And then obviously, you at the large scale enterprise or the big, the big boy companies, governance, risk, and compliance is a reality. So are you good at that? Do you have a mechanism to deliver that? And then, of course, you can do all of that good, but you better be good at agility. Agility is just a fancy way of saying you better have a strategy for things like infrastructure as code, probably a building clouds, and you're not using Puppet or Chef. You're probably doing it wrong, right? You're not getting the value out of the, you can get instantaneous servers, and then you've got a checklist of building a server for, a day and a half, and then it's all error prone, right? So, I mean, this is bread and butter for people at this conference. So talking about the not being good at this, right? How many people heard of Knight Capital? The Knight Capital story. Yes, one person, right? So this is a company that owned the market share of a trading company in the U.S. Basically had 17% of all trading companies. They basically made a really bad mistake, and I'll tell you what the mistake was in a minute, and they lost $440 million in 40 minutes. In 24 hours, they lost 75% of their equity and basically went out of business shortly after. And although I don't know that there's one answer in this circle that says this couldn't have happened anywhere, and it was really something, most of you people will relate to this, they basically had a testing system that did electronic low latency trading transactions, and the test system got put in production. So in 45 minutes, they started making real trades that were supposedly fake trades, and it just, Google it. It's an incredibly crazy story, right? And I don't know, again, I'm just pointing out that, like, bad things can happen. So when those guys that come in, and I'm not trying to be one of those guys that scares you about not going to cloud, because if you follow my background, I'm a pro-cloud person all the way. But, this is a company that was pretty much around for a really long time, had incredible market share, and went out of business almost in 24 hours. So here's the thing, right? And I listen to a lot of people talk about best practices in cloud, right? And yeah, you're right? They are. Do this, do this, do this. in a perfect world, all those do these things work perfectly. But the truth of the matter is not all applications are equal. Not all businesses are equal. So the reality is there's all levels of, and especially the larger you are, that the simple decisions of you should do this, you should do this, you should do this, or you don't go to the cloud, not an option. So in a cloudy world, right, I should basically have fault-tolerant applications. But not every company can take every business and redesign it to be fault-tolerant. So then what do you do with those people? And what if they need to add extensions to those things? What if there's some new development? Do they rewrite the back end? We had a company, when I first got into Enstratius, we had a company that came in that before I got there, they actually took a contract where they were going to forklift. Originally, it was going to be a WebSphere application over to Amazon. Once they found out the pricing, they did this like crash course change to Tomcat. And you can imagine how that story went. They went from really expensive bare metal that never broke to now this application was so brittle and never had to worry about that brittleness on really expensive hardware, but just things like panic checks, right, or kernel panics wiped out the whole application, right? So commodity infrastructure doesn't work for every application. Durability may or may not be something that you need. Coupling, we talk a lot about, if you're in the cloud, you need to have decoupled applications. Well, yes, that's absolutely true. And you probably shouldn't move tightly coupled applications. You shouldn't forklift legacy applications that are tightly coupled to a cloud. This is probably not going to end well. But the problem is you can't forklift them. You're probably not going to rewrite them because they make a ton of money and they don't have a whole lot of resources allocated to them anyway. Okay, what about greenfield applications? Well, not all application developers and not all application groups in every company are equal. So to tell every company, oh, by the way, all that expertise you have in development and coding, scrap that. You now have to develop things this way and tough. Well, it just doesn't work that way. So the point is you're going to have to put applications spread out between different infrastructures. And that's the reality. Scaling. I love hearing this scaling story, right? Again, yes, you should try to basically go with smaller systems and you should basically try to go horizontal, not vertical. But again, that may not be true in every situation. Some applications love honking big machines with ridiculous amount of memory. I'm not going to tell you I'm an expert on what Facebook does, but from the conversations I've had with some of their SREs, that's how they run their machines. Right? So it's not always, it has to be, certifications, we all know that. Latency. So, I've got this really cool story. I call it the Goldilocks DR. So the Goldilocks porridge, it's just right, right? So there's this large trading company out of New York. There's a low latency electronic trading application. It's funny, actually, when I talked to them about cloud, it was like, well, these applications have to be really close to each other from a latency perspective. And these trading applications, data can be spread out anywhere. Right? So again, even within the same company, different applications, different requirements. But for this Goldilocks scenario, they had a basically ultra low latency application, trading application, that was basically the DR was 5 miles away. Right? And then after Sandy, they didn't get wiped out. They did okay. But then the audit guys come in and said, that's way too close. Based on what happened in New Jersey with Sandy, you're going to have to spread that out. So what they're doing now is they're trying to build a data center in Northern Virginia, 2 data centers. And anybody want to guess how many miles apart they're trying to make them? Coffee, or a free beer if you drink beer if you answer this right.
6 miles.
No, 93 miles. Because that is the physics of, and I'm not a physics expert, but basically that's the 1 millisecond thread for how far you can go the speed of light before it goes over a millisecond transaction. So the Goldilocks DR, isn't that brilliant? Like, I've got to build it way more than 5, but less than 93 miles. So I'm making it 92.5 miles away. But the point is, not all applications are equal. Therefore, not all clouds. There's not a one-size-fits-all for clouds. And then in Tennessee, right, again, whether it's based on fact or it doesn't matter. I've talked to people at the DoD, the Joint Warfare Analysis Center. they'll just say, John, I don't care what you tell me about shared hypervisors. These applications are never going on a box with another customer. Sorry. You can get all the Zen experts on the planet to prove to them why that couldn't happen, which actually I'm not one of those experts, and I've read enough to show that there's been all sorts of hacks, even in Amazon, for people figuring out location of their competitors. There's tons of really cool articles out there about that. And then GRC, right? So, ethics. Contrary to popular opinion, there are some big companies that actually have ethics, right? And they're and it's part of how they want to deliver service. And even if they're not actually ethical for the right reasons, they might be ethical because that's the promise they made to their customers. And don't kid yourself, the poster childs like Etsy and Netflix, they all have code of conducts and compliance and ethical codes that they promise to their customers. Does your cloudification support the global strategy goals of the company? Audit, how do you, so think about a really complex application today, like especially using Puppet as example, right? We might have the application spread out in a Java Tomcat stack across MySQL, Memcache. It might have some other things going on, different cluster database. So I got to sign all the kind of credentials and things how people can change all that stuff, right? Tokens, how do you get into those applications? Then you got the middleware stuff. Who gets access to the MySQL database? And by the way, where are the passwords that create the original database in the Puppet classes that get run? Right? Okay, different story, right? So are they encrypted, right? Are they encrypted at rest? But then we got all that. Then you got the cloud provisioning solution and the passwords associated with that and the user access to that. And then you have the kind of who changes the network stuff. And so think about the problem of the auditor coming in and trying to figure out, or somebody trying to troubleshoot or work the chain backward of what went wrong to figure out all the different ways and that people could have got into those systems. And how do I tie all that back? Even the best Splunkster on the planet would have a hard time tying that all back to one piece, right? And then, you've got all the forms of risk, technology risk. Are you right-sizing things? Are you putting, there's, back to the ethics thing. There's a company that right now that, there's something called a benevolent corporation, right? So it's a pretty hard certification to get. It means you got to do certain things and maintain certain ways to be a benevolent. Etsy, Ben & Jerry's, Patagonia, right? They don't want to lose that. And so they've got to do a lot of things, and some of them are like being really good about power, no power pollution. There's companies that have kind of guidelines for data at rest shouldn't consume power, power pollution. Financial risk. I talked about the Zynga story. I talked about where people are basically, Wild West not really managing. Is that in line with the strategy of the organization? And then, of course, InfoSec. How do you know when you've got these composite applications spread across multiple frameworks, different cloud frameworks? How do you know when an employee quits? Where are all the places? Who is that employee? Who's that employee on MySQL? Who's that employee on Amazon? Who's the employee when the security group is changed? Who's that employee when they run a CLI command or they SSH into the machine and shut something down? Right? Where are those risks? And where is the one system that tells you all that? And there is none. And then finally, compliance, right? Who cares, right? But that's the part where, again, doing things wrong can be really dangerous. So as part of a Dell employee, I had to take this not foolish, sorry, Dell, if you're going to watch this, but it's a 4-hour course on compliance, right? And it was like incredible, all the things I was listening to about all the ways people could go to jail. And, in Malaysia, if you break an export law, you go to jail for life. Other countries, they're not as strict, 10 or 20 years. Or in other places, you lose your exporting rights in that country. Like, what's that worth? And guess what, folks? Cloud services is an exportable good, right? And again, then you think about, like, what are all the compliance issues of personal information? When you talk to some really big companies that do commercial business across the globe, their first question about how is your cloud management solution going to help me is how are you going to protect me from not letting all this self-service stuff let people put that kind of data in the wrong place. Because it's serious stuff. And I talked about contracts. And then finally, agility, kind of this golden circle or just a circle, right? We have configuration management, right? Like, you better be good at automation, and automation better be some level of, something like Puppet. I mean, again, I don't have to sell that in this room, I don't think. But, you better have a strategy for, infrastructure as code. And, I used to love, they called can you throw a server out the 9th floor test? Right? Anybody heard that? They said, just build it, rebuild it. It gets rebuilt, right? The actual persistence of the server is ephemeral, right? And so being really good at configuration. And I love the, how many people kind of know the story of Puppet, Chef, CF Engine, the history of, anybody want a history of configuration management? I've got a little bit of time. Yes, no? Hey, we got 2 hands. All right, so I started way back what would be called first generation configuration management, right? Was kind of non-converged infrastructure, non-desired state. The state of the configuration management was really a package. And so things like Tivoli, Blade Logic to a certain extent, all the BMC stuff, the HP Opsware stuff, really not focused on configuration. Actually, I don't have time for this. Sorry, I was doing better. Anyway, service management is a part, right? In the simple form, like ServiceNow is eating up the enterprise, right? Everywhere I go, I see ServiceNow, right? So change management, incident management, all matter. And then orchestration is not a solved problem. It is not a solved problem, right? It's a complex adaptive systems. Getting orchestration. It's one thing to spray out an application and have it start up in a certain order, which, by the way, folks, Chef, Puppet, none of these products really do solve well. But even if you can solve that well, how do you maintain the operational state? A lot of discussions about that. So I'm going to quickly run into the demonstration. I just want to tell you about our product. We don't do all the things I was just talking about. We do some of them well. We start with an open source tool called the Dasein Cloud. It's basically a primitive abstraction of 20 different clouds. Most of the ones you've known. It's a way to create primitives for compute, storage, object storage, block storage, and to a certain extent network. And then we also have, we say we have a non-opinionated approach to infrastructure or clouds. We have a non-opinionated approach to Chef and Puppet. In fact, we have some customers that actually run Chef and Puppet within the same templates. They've acquired different groups. Some of these large companies actually have different competing groups, and they're not making a decision. They're just letting this group run Chef and this group run Puppet. I can name 3 or 4 large companies that do that. And so we think that we solve a good part of the kind of access control. We put role-based access down to the resource level. This person can start this instance in this cloud, but not at that cloud. They can only pause it in this cloud. They can only create object store here. And that's how you start creating kind of global compliance. So let me quickly try to show you a demo here, if the demo guards. So the first thing I want to show you is basically what is our, it's just our just straight old Puppet integration. And my window sizes are all horrible here, so. Going backwards. Darn it. I'll just grab this one. I don't think it's going to work. So I'm going to do a launch of an instance, right? So I have we do image management. You can create your own images. And then obviously depending on the cloud and what kind of image model it supports, some better than the other. Basically, I can launch a system. I'm just going to test, key pair. I can set, this is all just basic stuff that you would get from the console. I can select a firewall. I can set my key pairs if this one happens to be Amazon. This is kind of interesting. We'll basically allow you to stripe volumes. So we'll put, like, if you support block storage, we'll actually allow you to not only create a volume count, but we'll stripe it, and we'll also encrypt it so you can kind of completely, it'll automatically provision and launch the block storage in a multi-volume and rate it and encrypt it. The thing I kind of really wanted to show you here is the configuration management. We basically register, just like we register clouds, we'll register all your configuration management accounts. And so you can see we have like Chef and Puppet, and I have a Puppet 3.0 here. And then so now we just go right out. And this is the thing, all the credentials for all your clouds, the credentials, every cloud that you have, every sensitive piece of data that you want to use in like a Puppet manifest or a class or a Puppet or a Chef recipe, and all the credentials to the configuration management are all stored in an encrypted key management store that we have as part of our infrastructure. And then here I've got, I'm just going to move in run list web server. And now, and the other thing is we don't put any requirements on Chef or Puppet. In other words, we natively connect out. These are native classes. It is going to run that configuration in its native format, and then I'm going to launch a server. So that's not real interesting, except that what I wanted to show you here, how much time do I got? Let me just show you the deployment model, and then I'll finish here. And that is, if I look here, so what we do then is we create these catalog templates, and then based on role-based access, users can come in, and this whole idea that I can start creating these templates of delivery, and I could architect out where everything lives, where the data storage goes, where the application goes. And then if I look down here, where's my Puppet demo? Damn it. There's my Puppet Enterprise. I went to the wrong one. Hold on. Automation. Design. Here, we'll be done as soon as I show this. So we basically give you kind of a workflow. Then this is just on Amazon, but here's the point is, part of the application is going to be in the Japan region, part of it's going to be in Northern Virginia, but I could build out regions across multiple clouds. So now I can construct these patterns of templates based on consumption, and as you as a user, the only thing that you'd ever get to see is what you're allocated either for your department code, and so you not only get control on what you can do, but your templates for delivery are all predefined and follow the policies that you're trying to put in place that hopefully protect your organization from allowing your users to have that ultimate freedom of getting consumable resources, but not allowing them to put the business out of business. That's all I had. Thank you very much.